So good evening, everyone. And tonight we continue with our exciting trip with Daniel. Now, before I start with the text, I want to go over, because it's been coming up a lot, the strange chronology that we have in Daniel and the strange kind of king list that we have to keep in mind when we see how Daniel kind of works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, and I'm just going to show you like a standard, like the Wikipedia page of the Achaemenid kings, and I'm going to compare that to what Daniel is doing with the king chronology. Okay, so let me, I will share, let me make sure I have the right thing on my screen, and I will share it with you. Okay, great. Okay, here we are. Okay, so here you can see I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page for the Achaemenid kings. And in fact, this is the sort of chronology that we are going to see if we learn, if you open Ezra Nehemiah, this chronology is absolutely reflected there. So it's not like we don't have biblical books that reference this chronology. All right, so we have Cyrus the Great, that's Koresh. Okay, he's the guy who's like, okay, all the Jews can kind of go back to Judea and rebuild your temple. That's Cyrus. Okay, then we have Cambyses, who we usually call, who is usually in biblical Hebrew called Cambuzi. That's his son, or I shouldn't say his son. That's the person who, his successor. Okay, then Bardias Smerdis is kind of an imposter, kind of an iffy character. He's only there for a year anyway. And Darius. Okay, Darius is the next guy. He's very important in the biblical chronology because he is the one who allows us to finish building the Beit HaMikdash. And so he's very important in the chronology of Ezra and Nehemiah, where we build the Beit HaMikdash. Also, of course, in the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah, where they're urging the Jews to finish building the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. After Darius, we have Xerxes the First. That would be Achashverosh, right? So that not necessarily the Achashverosh of the Megillah. We have more than one Xerxes, right? So depending on where you want to put the Megillah, but Xerxes the First, Artaxerxes, that's Artaxerxes. Okay. Now both Ezra and Nehemiah serve under an Artaxerxes. The question is which one, and whether it's both under the same one. So academically, from an academic perspective, it seems, and not just from an academic perspective, if you're looking at the end of the book, it has a series of Kohanim Gdolim, of high priests, who serve with each of them, with Ezra and with Nehemiah, and it appears that Ezra is actually coming after Nehemiah. So it's possible that Nehemiah is under one of the earlier Artaxerxes, and Ezra is under one of the later Artaxerxes. But you can see there's more than one Darius. There's more than one Artaxerxes. There's more than one Xerxes. All right, so we have this kind of, and here we finally have Darius III, who ends up the Persian Empire. He's the guy who kind of loses everything, right? So if we go to, say, okay, so what in terms of Daniel, what do we have in Daniel? So these are the kings that you have in Daniel. In Daniel, you had Nebuchadnezzar. I put the second just because he's the Nebuchadnezzar we know and love, quote unquote, right? But this is Nebuchadnezzar. So he has, I'm going to take out the second because it doesn't say second there. Nebuchadnezzar, and then Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar is not, it skips over Nabonidus. Nabonidus is the king following Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar is Nabonidus' son, who serves as a regent when Nabonidus takes himself off to a different part of the kingdom. Okay, Belshazzar himself is never the actual king, even though in Daniel he's counted as a king. They didn't even know about Belshazzar. In other words, they knew about him from Daniel. They were trying to figure out who he was, and then they actually found a document that talked about Belshazzar, right? But they for many years they didn't know who Belshazzar was. Now after, and now we know he was the son of Nabonidus, who served as kind of a regent during Nabonidus' reign. Okay. Then we have in Daniel this guy, Darius the Mede, right? The Daryavesh of the Medians, right? Now, there's a problem here because that's not how it doesn't fit any sort of history that we have. So again, going back here, We have the very first Darius is after Cyrus. All right. Even kind of well after Cyrus. He's not so long after Cyrus, but enough that you wouldn't say Darius comes before Cyrus. But in Daniel, we have this Darius the Mede who represents the Medians, okay? And he precedes Cyrus the Persian, which makes for kind of a confusing chronology. It works with the way Daniel presents the four kingdoms, okay? Where we have Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. Right? So that way you have the four kingdoms of Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece, with Media and Persia being two separate kingdoms. The problem is that it doesn't really work with the chronology that we know of the Persians, and it doesn't mean and again, I want to say this again, it doesn't match the chronology of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Like it doesn't match that chronology. You could say, well, there's another Darius we never heard. It's easy to kind of say, well, there's this king who wasn't mentioned in Ezra and Nehemiah, because he wasn't relevant to them. And that was Darius the Mede, who comes before Cyrus. It's a little strange, though. So what is one hypothesis is that there's this guy, Gobrias, who's mentioned, and he's kind of a general under Cyrus. And he's the guy who kind of helps conquer Babylonia, and he governs it for a little while until he dies. And he also is called, probably, he might also be the same guy as Ugbaru, who's the governor of Gutia. Okay, why do we care? If we look at the map, so, and I'm using Wikipedia maps here. So they're not to take that, it's all kind of an estimate. It's around. So this is where Media is more or less. You see, it's above Elam. It's under the Caspian Sea. It's above the Persian Gulf. You can see where it is. Now, if we look at where Gutium is, okay, it's not quite in the same place. If we compare, here's the Persian Gulf, here's the Caspian Sea. Let's look here, Persian Gulf, Caspian Sea. So not quite the same, right? It would have to be kind of closer to here to really be Media the way it is in this map, right? We're getting a different perspective. We're looking at it from a different point of view. Still, you could say, well, maybe that's who they're referring to, is this guy who's from this area, who rules for a while in Babylon. The problem, of course, is that he's never a king. He's just kind of a viceroy, maybe. So it's a little bit, it's still a stretch. It's still kind of a question of where they got it. But maybe, right? That could be it, right? So it's a possibility. It's absolutely not accepted by everyone. But if we're looking for Darius the Mede as an actual historical figure, then this could be someone that we find. Problem, of course, is that he's never called Darius. He's not really a Mede. So it's a question, right? But if we're looking for someone, we could say that, right? Because the whole point in Daniel is that Babylon falls to Darius and not yet to Cyrus, right? So Babylon falls to Darius, and then Cyrus takes over. So you have two separate kingdoms. Then afterwards, you're going to have the Greek kingdom. Now, I want to bring this up now, of course, because as we go into Daniel 9, that's the Daniel Tet, right? It's going to start talking about this Daryavesh guy, and we need to remember that he's supposed to be before Koresh. All right. So here we have, I'm going to go right into the text. Actually, I'm going to pause for questions. Let me stop the share and see your questions. Okay, from what source do we know the name Gobrias? So Gobrias is actually mentioned. You can actually find them. Hold on just a second, and I'll. They are mentioned in the Cyropedia of Xenophon. Okay, and then Ugbaru is mentioned in the Nabonidus Chronicle. So they have so there's a question of, is it the same person or not, right? That's a question, right? So Gobrias is also mentioned in Herodotus as one of the 6 helpers of Darius. So that's a little bit different. And in the Cyropedia of Xenophon, Gobrias is mentioned as a general who helps conquer Babylon. Okay. And then by Herodotus, he's mentioned as that he's the lance bearer Darius the Great. So you have different, you have Gobryas as a name mentioned in different ways in different contexts because it's apparently not that uncommon a name, right? So there you go. And let's see, other questions. What document has the name Belshazzar? Oh, this is where it is. It's not from the Nabonidus Chronicle. It's from a clay cylinder that's about the restoration of Sin's ziggurat at Ur. What's that? Isn't that Nabonidus Chronicle? There's an administrative document that mentions a slave of Belshazzar. And then you have, right, so that's not, there's actually, I think there's more than one document that mentions him, but they didn't find it until relatively late. And they also, I think they didn't realize what the relationship was so much. He never gets the title of king though. Okay.
Wait, can you, Miriam?
Yes.
So the Persian Empire, wait, the Babylonian Empire falls. How long did the Medes rule?
The Medes don't rule. This is the problem. The Medes don't rule. There's no, like, historically, the Medes don't rule. Historically, this is a historical fiction, right? So if we're going to say, you understand, the guy that we're trying to say is Darius the Mede is just a general for Cyrus. Understand? So like we're kind of reaching, we're kind of trying to figure out where this is coming from, right? But you could say that Persia and the Persians and Medes have a joint empire. Like you could say the Persians are essentially the Medes, that's fine. But to say that the Medes ruled at a separate time, historically we just don't have a source for it. And I'm going to go back to saying that that's true for every other biblical book as well. This is the problem. Like, even if you say, oh, you know, Miriam, you are a total heretic, how can you say this? I said, look, if you take a look at the other books of the Bible, they all talk about Koresh being the one who won against Babylon, against Babylonia, who allowed the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. Like, in other words, other books, not Esther. Esther kind of messes up the whole chronology, but not this way. It messes up the chronology a whole different way, different way, right? Like, and that was a problem again of the Seder Olam Rabbah. The Seder Olam Rabbah that was trying to build a chronology of from the beginning of the world, from the creation of the world, right? Had to reconcile Ezra and Nehemiah with Esther. I don't even remember, and I don't remember what he did with Daniel. Like, he had to reconcile Daniel also, obviously, but the thing is that what this Darius the Mede thing, the only way you can reconcile with the other biblical books is saying, well, they just don't mention him, right? Because he's not that important, right? But the question is, why would he not be important? He's the one who wins against Babylon. If he was the one who wins against Babylonia, why wouldn't he be mentioned? So the problem is that historically, we don't have a time period that Medes ruled. Now, you could say, well, we're going to find the same way we found out about Belshazzar, we'll find out about this Darius the Mede guy. Hey, anything's possible, right? The question is, it doesn't work with the other biblical books either. Like, the other biblical books don't really seem to talk about a Darius the Mede. The Darius we're used to talking about is the one who comes after Koresh, right? And he is important because if we look back, again, it's under Darius that we finish building the temple, because under Koresh, we're allowed to return. Things are rough, things are hard, and the temple doesn't get built. There's an altar. It seems that there's an altar that's built and dedicated. It seems like they're using that altar to bring sacrifices. However, the temple itself is not built, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit because it's very much because the impetus to finish the temple during the beginning of the reign of Darius is very much connected to Jeremiah's prophecy that this is all going to end in 70 years, right? And that's a prophecy we're going to be drawing from in this chapter as well, right? That idea that the exile lasts for 70 years. And according to a certain count, and we're going to discuss it, that ending is right around the beginning of Darius's reign. And so there's a real push by Zechariah and Haggai, the prophets, to finish the temple finally in the beginning of Darius's reign. They push for it and they get it done. People actually listen and they get it done. But let's go back to Daniel. I'm gonna one more pause. If anyone has a question before we kind of dive into the text. Questions? No. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay. All right. Oops. Okay, we did this. Let's go into Daniel. Okay, Bishnat achat l'Daryavesh ben Achashverosh mizera Madai, asher homlach al malchut kasdim. Now, when I was a kid, this is what I learned. I learned that that Achashverosh married Esther, and Esther had and Esther's child was Daryavesh, was Darius, who allowed the temple to be rebuilt. Right. That's what I learned as a kid, that this was that chronology, right? And this was that Achashverosh. Here it's difficult because Darius here is from the Medes. He's from the children of he's from the seed of Madai, right? And yet he's the son of this name that's known to us from Persian kings, Achashverosh, who is Xerxes, right? Exactly how this is supposed to work is not super clear. Now, there's no reason why he couldn't be the son of Xerxes, to be honest, because it's a common name. Like you could have, not common, but it doesn't, just because they're Persian kings who have the name Xerxes doesn't mean you couldn't have another king who's named Xerxes. But anyway, Asher Homlach al Malchut Kasdim, who was made king over the kingdom of the Babylonians, of the Chaldean, the Kasdim, that's the Babylonians, right? So he became king over the Babylonians. Bishnat achat l'malcho ani Daniel binoti basfarim, right? In the first year of his rule, I, Daniel, was contemplating books, right? In books, I was contemplating books. What was he looking for in the books? Mispar hashanim asher haya dvar Hashem el Yirmiyah hanavi limalot lechorvot Yerushalayim 70 shana, right? The number of years that were for the word of God to Yirmiyahu, to Jeremiah, to fulfill the ruins of Jerusalem. In other words, till when it's going to be rebuilt, 70 years. And I want to pause here and I want to say a couple of things. Okay, first of all, this is typical of Second Temple books, that there's an assumption that other things are written in books. He's got a book, and in that book, it's a scroll, right? It's a text, right? If books don't mean, a book with turning pages. They didn't have those yet. It means a scroll, it means a text, but we're going to call it books because it's easier. They have actually written documents with the prophetic books, with the different books that that they can refer to, right? What is he referring to here? Let's take a look. Here we have two places in Yirmiyahu and Jeremiah. We are now reading in Perek Chaf Hey, that's chapter 25, Pasuk Yud Aleph, that's verse 11. Vayta kol haaretz hazot lechorba l'shama vavdu hagoyim ha'ele et melech Bavel 70 shana. All of this land is going to be ruin is going to be destroyed, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Vayachim lot 70 shana. And remember, I'm reading from Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah now. I'm not reading from Daniel. Vayachim lot 70 shana efkod al melech Bavel ve'al hagoy hahu no'um Adonai et avonam ve'al eretz kasdim v'samti oto l'shimimot olam. And it will be when these 70 years are fulfilled, I will then hold the king of Babylon and this nation to account, says God. I will make them pay for their sin, and as well as the land of the custom of the Chaldeans of Babylon, of Babylon. And I will make it for a ruin forever. Okay. And I'm just going to paraphrase now, then I will bring on this land everything that's written in this book, in this scroll, right? Everything that Yirmiyahu prophesied against the nations. All right. Once then later on, we have in chapter 29, similar prophecy. This is a chapter 29, Chavtet, Pasuk Yod, verse 10. Ki כה אמר אדוני, כי לפי מלאת לבבל 70 שנה אפקוד אתכם, והקימותי עליכם את דברי הטוב, להשיב אתכם על המקום הזה. When Babylon has fulfilled the 70 years, I will remember you, and I will bring my good word, my good prophecy is going to come true for you, Israel, and to return you to this place. That's what's going to happen at the end of 70 years. Daniel's counting the 70 years. What are these 70 years? Now, I mentioned earlier that the 70 years were probably an impetus for Zechariah and Haggai to urge the rebuilding of the temple under Darius. It depends on how we count 70 years. So if this prophecy would normally, if we just went by the plain meaning of the text, we would normally think that it was about the first exile. I'll remind you that there are two exiles of the Jerusalemites. The first one is in 597 BCE. That's when the better people kind of get exiled. Now Jeremiah himself is not exiled with those people. He stays, right? So the question is are we counting from them? Most of us probably would count from 586 BCE. That's the destruction of the temple, okay? Then if we count forward, Darius year 2, which is when they rebuild the temple, is 519 BCE. 586, 519, more or less 70 years, very close to 70 years, all right? It takes them 2 years to finish. They are, so we're talking very, very close to 70 years difference there. And it's very much considered to be the, and that's the 70 years. Now, when Daniel's talking about 70 years, how is he counting it? It's not clear. Because you could read it from the time of Yirmiyahu's prophecy also, which is 605 BCE, right? But let's go back now to our text. Any questions before I go back to the text? I don't like counting any more than you guys do. Probably you guys like counting a lot more than I do. Whenever there's math, I'm like, okay, I'm writing this down. Like, I'm okay at math, but it's not fun for me. Okay, so here we go. All right, so back to Daniel. So he goes and he's like, okay, Yirmiyahu prophesied 70 years. And here I am living in the time of Darius the Mede, okay? So I want to make sure, I want to pray to God, right, that this restoration should in fact happen. Ve'etnat panai el Adonai Elohim l'vakesh tefillah v'tachanonim b'tzom v'sak ve'efer, right? And so I turn my face to God to request through prayer and kind of begging through with fast and sackcloth and ashes. This is kind of a penitent attitude, because as you'll see, what we see very much in the prayer of Daniel is the standard stance, which is the destruction of the temple was because of Israel's sins, right? We ask for forgiveness and we ask for the temple to be restored, right? You'll see that a lot of the language that Daniel uses, we use in Yamim Noraim in the days of R, right? You'll hear a lot of echoes as we read through the prayer. Now, please, if you have questions, and this is an unusual, now, what in terms of the prayer, one of the things that's a possibility is that this prayer that's being put here in Daniel was actually a prayer of wider use, right? That's being included in this chapter of Daniel. However, it does connect, the language does connect in the kind of narrative frame. There's some certain common words, it does connect, but it's possible that this prayer actually did also have an independent existence outside of the book of Daniel. Okay, it's not like we found it independently, but it's very possible. Okay. ואת פללה לאדוני אלוהי ואתוודה, ואומרה אנא אדוני האל הגדול והנורא, שומר הברית והחסד, לאוהביו ולשומר מצוותיו. Right, and I prayed to him, and I confessed, like you would do before, let's say Yom Kippur, in biblically, right, as the high priest would do, and I said, please, my Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps the covenant and kindness for those who love him and those who keep his commandments. Chatano v'avinu hirshadnu umaradnu v'sor mitzvotecha u'mishpatecha. Starting right away, we sinned. I always just say we sinned and we sinned. Like we don't, like we can find all the, here we have sinned and we have dealt iniquitously. We sinned and we sinned. We sinned and we rebelled, right? It's like they say, they used to say, it's not true that, Eskimos have 20 words for snow. It's not quite true, but when you have a lot of something, when it makes a difference, that's when you have multiple words for the thing. So if you have like lots of different types of, you have lots of bushes, you may have 20 different words for the different types of bushes. We've got 20 words for sin, right? So here we have going through all the different, several of the different words for sin. We sinned and we sinned, we sinned and we rebelled, right? And we went away from your commandments and your laws. ולא שמענו אל עבדיך הנביאים אשר דיברו בשמך אל מלאכינו, שרינו ואבותינו ואל כל עם הארץ. And we didn't listen to your servants, the prophets, who spoke with your name, to the kings and the officers, and to our forefathers, and to all the people of the land. In other words, it wasn't just that our leaders sinned, we all sinned. None of us listened to the prophets who are coming to warn us. לך אדוני הצדקה ולנו בושת הפנים כיום הזה. לאיש יהודה וליושבי ירושלים ולכל ישראל הקרובים והרחוקים בכל הארצות אשר הדחתם שם במעלם אשר מעלו בך. To you, God, is the righteousness, is the justice, and to us is the shame, is the shame at this day. Yes, we use this in our prayer today, right? In the Yamim Noraim, in the days of awe, we absolutely say the same thing. We say, you, God, are righteous, and we are the ones who are shamed on this day because we sinned and you are just. Right? And absolutely, we're drawing from this prayer, okay? And he's saying, and whom is he referring to? The people of Judea, to the dwellers of Jerusalem, and to all of Israel, close and far, in all the lands that you scattered them, right? For the sin they did. There's all of Israel, right? Is kind of being included in this repentance, not just in the sin, but also in the repentance. We're all ashamed and we're all repenting everywhere, right? I do want to point out one thing. Yerushalayim, it's one of the most common, after the name of God, of course, it's one of the most common kriyuchtiv we have in Tanakh and the Hebrew Bible. What's kriyuchtiv? For those who don't know, kriyuchtiv is one thing is written and we read something else. Okay, usually frequently different vocalization, sometimes with different vowels, sometimes whole different words. Okay, different reasons for this are either there actually seem to have been two different versions that the scribes had in front of them, and in order to kind of make a compromise, one was written, one was said. Other cases where the written word was considered just too rude to say, right? Like the root shin gimel lamed, which was considered quite crude and was frequently changed to the root shin chaf bet. Or the name of God, which you don't actually pronounce the letters for, right? So you say something else instead. You say my Lord instead. And here, Yerushalayim is actually spelled Yerushalem, right? Yerushalem, that was almost certainly the way it was pronounced until later, right? And so it is vocalized with the later pronunciation, even though, and so you have this little chirik that's been added here, the little dot there, without a yod, right? Because it's not written with a yod, because it was said Yerushalem, right? Today we say Yerushalayim, it was said Yerushalem, that's how it was spelled, but everywhere it is corrected, as it were, through kriyuchtiv, through reading it a different way, to Yerushalayim. Okay. So at any rate, so he's saying he's including everyone in the sin, but also in the repentance. Adonai lanu boshet hapanim lemilachenu l'sarenu v'lavotenu asher chatanu lach. Again, God, it's our shame to our kings, our officers, and our forefathers that we sinned against you. Because God, the Lord our God, to him is the mercy and forgiveness because we rebelled against him. And it's going to keep on going this way for a while, unfortunately. I might, we don't have that much time. I might paraphrase a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to go a little quicker. We didn't listen to God's voice, to go in his Torah, in his laws that were given before us through his prophets, and all of Israel transgressed your law and went astray without listening to your voice. And here, batitach aleinu ha'ala v'ashvua, and you poured on us. So this is almost like the way you would pour like metal, right, molten metal, on us, the curse and the oath. Batitach aleinu ha'ala v'ashvua, asher k'tuva b'torat Moshe eved Elohim ki chatanu lo, which is written in the law, in the Torah of Moshe, the servant of God, because we sinned against him. What is this curse? It is this curse here that we have in Deuteronomy, in Devarim Chavchet, chapter 28. Okay, and here we have Vaya im lo tishma b'kol Adonai Elohecha l'shmor la'asot et kol mitzvotav v'chukotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom uba'u alecha kol haklalot ha'ela v'hisigucha. If you don't listen to the voice of the Lord your God to do all his commandments and his laws, which I am commanding you today, you are going to have these curses. And remember that the nation of Israel has sworn an oath that this is the way it's going to be, right? That they accept these curses, and it's, curse are you in the city, curse are you in the field. Essentially, your enemies are going to chase you down. It's just going to be absolutely everything's going to be terrible, right? You're not going to have food. You're not going to have your enemy will easily conquer you. All of these oaths, all these curses will come true if you stop listening to the law of God. And so Daniel is saying, and that's what we did. We stopped listening to the law of God. So God, in fact, poured this curse on us. Moving back. Okay. And again, he's referring to the law of Moshe. He's able to refer back to the Torah that everyone knows. Right? The same way he can refer back to Yirmiyahu 70 years, he can refer back to the Torah and everyone and give almost a citation, and everyone knows what he's talking about, right? Vayakem et dvaro asher diber alenu v'ashoftenu asher shvatunu lavi alenu ra'ah gdola asher lo nesta tachat kol shamayim kasher nesta b'Yerushalayim. And God, in fact, kept his word that he spoke to us. And against our judges who judged us. And there's a lot of hints here that the leaders were, okay, yeah, we all sinned, but the leaders were particularly to blame. Like he's constantly listing the leaders. Here's the judges, also these people who should have kept us on the right path. They also sinned, and God punished them. Okay. And this great evil that it was never done under the entire heaven like it was done in Jerusalem. And this is that idea that the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem was a cataclysmic historical event kind of for the world, right? And that's something that is something that informs also when the second temple is destroyed, very much the Jews, of course, the Jewish people. I'm saying something to you, you're taking it almost for granted that of course the Jewish people feels this way, but here we really see, and when we read, a lot of times we really like Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, there really is this knowledge that the temple is ours, it's our tragedy, it's our national tragedy. Here we see it as this kind of this unbelievable punishment that has never been happened before. Like it's not like anything that's ever happened. It's so horrible, right? And that's a similar and we see this approach now to the destruction of the first temple, and we see it later to this, of course, to the destruction of the second temple. Kasher Katuv b'Torah Moshe, right? Okay, so this is again, as it was written in the Torah of Moshe, all this evil came to us, and we didn't pray. Lo v'lo chilinu et pnei Hashem Elokeinu l'shuv me'avonenu u'laskil b'mitecha. We did not pray towards God to return from our sin and to learn your truth, right? In other words, even though this horrible thing happened, we didn't repent at the time, right? Therefore, Vayishkod Adonai al Ra'a v'yibe'eha aleinu ki tzadik Adonai Eloheinu al kol ma'asav asher asa v'lo shamanu b'kolo. So God was in fact, he kept his determination to do evil, and he brought it on us because God is just, God is righteous for all the things he did, and we did not listen to his voice. Now, tzaddik, we always translate tzaddik now as righteous, but tzaddik also means to be correct in a court of law. Like you are the correct party in a court of law. And here we're saying God had every right to do this. God warned us, we promised, we didn't listen. After we started the punishment, we still didn't pray, we didn't repent. God had every right to keep doing this. This language of vayishkod, right? That God kind of kept on the path and watched and made sure to do this evil. It's actually reflecting what we have here again in Yirmiyahu. This is Yirmiyahu Mem Daled, Yirmiyahu 44, verse 27. Hineni shoked alehem lira'a v'lo l'tova. Right? God's like, I will watch over his not, I will determine over them for evil and not for good. Right? This is again the prophecy of punishment. It seems quite clear. I mean, you can see the parallel, right? The Daniel here, Vayishkod Hashem al hara'ah, right? And God kind of kept watch to do evil, is a pretty clear parallel for Hineni shoked alehem lira'a, where God promised, I am going to watch over you to do evil. So what happened to us was simply the culmination of what we were warned about. Okay, and therefore God is just, right? God warned us, we still didn't repent, and so even though this thing is totally unprecedented, this horrible punishment, we had it covered. Okay, but now's the time for redemption. Vata Adonai Eloheinu asher hotzeita et amcha me'eretz Mitzrayim b'yad chazaka, v'taz l'cha Hashem kayom hazeh. Chatanu Rashanu. And now, Lord our God, who took your nation from the land of Egypt with a strong arm, you should make yourself a name. And on this day, we have sinned, we have done evil. In other words, God, you saved us once, you can save us again. We're repenting now. All right. It keeps going. I'm gonna have to paraphrase again. I'm gonna take a pause because I see there's some questions, so hold on just a second. Okay, what do we have here? Let's move the chat. Okay. Oh, you're talking about why did the pronunciation of Jerusalem change? In the English, Jerusalem seems to still use the old pronunciation. The English Jerusalem probably uses the old pronunciation because it's from the Greek, which probably maintains that pronunciation. In other words, there are certain older ways of pronouncing names that actually were preserved in the Greek translation of the Bible. And when the English was created, or you could even say the Latin was created, so it was drawing from names the way they appeared in the Greek. So sometime when we're not in the middle of Daniel, ask me about the difference why Rachel, which is spelled with a chet, is in English Rachel, whereas Yitzchak, which is also spelled with a chet, is in English Isaac, right? With nothing there, right? And there's an idea that these actually, and that's how they're written in the Greek, right? Rachel is with a kai, and Yitzchak is with nothing, right? Instead of the chet, and that there's a theory that that actually reflects an earlier two different chets. In Ugaritic, we have two different chets. And in fact, there are two different chets for the word for lamb, which is Rachel, right? And the word for laughing, right? Which is Yitzchak. So you have actually those two different chets in Ugaritic, and there's a theory that those two different chets are what's being reflected in different spellings of those names. That's probably why we have it closer to Yerushalayim in English, which is probably from the Latin, Greek. So in terms of why did the pronunciation change, I'm not 100% sure why the pronunciation of Yerushalayim changed. I really don't know, because you would want to say, right, there are absolutely pronunciation differences where you see between the pronunciation of Hebrew in the northern kingdom and in the southern kingdom. In this case, that's not the way it is, because you still have Yerushalayim spelled in a Second Temple Judean work. You have it spelled without the yod, like it's Yerushalayim. Right? So at what point are they saying Yerushalayim and why? I don't know. I'd have to look it up. So I can't tell you off the top of my head. Okay. Back to our text. Okay, here we are. So we'll kind of speed through the end here. I'm not completely, because there are some nice parallels. So he says, okay, here we are. And it says, God as God or my Lord, because just as according to all your righteousness, right now take back your anger from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because it's through our sins and the sins of our forefathers that Jerusalem and your nation have become a shame for all your surroundings. And now, God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his, beseeching, and may your face light and shine your face on your desolate temple for you, essentially for your own sake. And this idea that God's going to forgive us for his own sake, to rebuild the temple for his own sake, that you actually already have in Devarim and Deuteronomy, right? The whole setup of Ha'azinu, right? Of the poem, if we go to here, right? Here, no. To Ha'azinu, Devarim, Lamed Bet, Deuteronomy 32. The reason that God forgives Israel at the end of that is for his own name. Right? Here, like Lulei Kas Oyev Agor Penya Nakrut Saremo Penya Muya Denu Rama Velo Adonai Pa'al Kozot, lest the enemy say our hand was strong, was overcame, and it isn't God that did this. Right? So the reason that God kind of ends up coming to the help of the sinning nation at the end of this poem is essentially for God's own name and reputation. And it's a classic thing where we say, not for us, but for your own glory, right? For your own name, because we are still sinners, right? So that's the classic thing here. We sinned, so we are, and then here. God, bend your ear to us, listen, right? And listen, open your eyes and see our desolation and the city. Yeah, this is actually, we have this in our prayer, right? Right? We just lift this straight for our prayer today, right? We draw so much from this prayer, talking about God, see our desolation, see the city that's in ruins. We are just relying on your mercy, not on our righteousness, but on your mercy and your forgiveness. And this, of course, also you will remember this line: Adonai Shema'a, Adonai Salacha, Adonai Hakshiva Vaseh Al Ta'achar L'mancha Elohai Ki Shimcha Nikra Al Yercha V'Al Amecha. Another verse we just take wholesale, put it right into our prayer because it's so great. God, hear us. God, forgive. God, listen and do not delay, right? Just the raw kind of please, just listen, just we don't have any more flowery words for you, my God, because your name is called over your city and over your nation, right? We just take this word straight from this prayer and kind of use it to express our feeling of, that's it. Please, God, listen. And And now Daniel finishes and he says, okay, and Daniel says, okay, so I'm still talking, I'm still praying, I'm still confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel. Daniel here is acting as a representative, as we noted already, of the entire people of Israel, right? So I am presenting, I'm putting my supplication before God, okay, over God's holy mountain, over the Temple Mount. So now the man Gabriel, we know he's not a man, right? He's an angel. The angel Gabriel that I saw, he saw it in the previous vision. If you remember from last week, he already met Gabriel. So he's like, that angel Gabriel that I met in the previous vision, right? And he's using the word man. I like it because it's the same word that we had for some angels, like in biblically, right? So it's a kind of a callback. Is flying and bi'af. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's hard to understand what that word actually means. You want to say, well, he's flying and flying, but bi'af, Ibn Ezra says it means with exhaustion, but it must be referring to Daniel because the angel can't be exhausted. In other words, he flew while I was exhausted, but it doesn't make that much sense. Whatever. Gabriel's flying to him, and he gets up to me, Noge'elai, at the time of Minchat Arav, at the time of the Mincha, the sacrifice of the evening. It makes sense that Daniel is praying towards evening. That's prayer time. As we know, Daniel is very careful about prayer times. And but also this is an important connection to the offerings in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash. As we saw in last week's chapter, this is a big concern in this part of the book is that there are no more offerings in the temple. Remember that when Daniel is supposed to be speaking, there's no functioning temple. Okay. He says, okay, Daniel, I came out to let you know what's what, right? I'm going to explain things to you. When you prayed, right, the word went out, and I'm going to tell this to you because God loves you. You're a beloved person, and you understand things, and you also understand vision. So I'm going to explain the whole thing to you. What's the 70? Okay, so now this is where it gets a little weird. All right, because we were talking about how those 70 years work out perfectly, almost perfectly, if we look from the destruction to the rebuilding of the temple, right? But it's not what he's going to say to him. He's going to say, Shavuim shiv'im nechtach al amecha al amcha val ir kodshecha. He's like, okay, you have 70 weeks. 70 weeks is 70 sets of 7 years, right? A week is a sabbatical cycle, all right? A cycle, a Shemitah cycle, right? So you've got 70 sets of 70 years, 490 years. It's been decreed on your nation and on the holy city to finish up the sin, to atone for the sin, and to bring justice and forever. And to seal the vision and prophet, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. What does it seem to be referring to here? So what seems to be happening here is that from the point of view of this chapter, the rebuilding, and we know from the point of view probably many at the time, the rebuilding of the temple was not considered to be it. The rebuilding wasn't so great. It doesn't count. When is the real redemption going to come? The real redemption is going to come when the Holy of Holies is re-anointed, right? When does that happen? That happens under the Maccabees, right? When everything's going on and they go and they re-anoint the temple. So if we look at, let's see where, I think the first Maccabees is probably going to be the best way to do this. Let's see if I can move this here. All right. Okay. This is a little bit later. I want to show you in chapter 4. It should be right. Let's see if I can find it. Here. So here I'm reading from First Maccabees chapter 4, verse 41. Then Yehuda ordered men to fight those in the citadel until he could purify the holy places. And he selected uncorrupted priests, devotees of the law, and they purified the holy places and took the stones of pollution to an unclean place. Now, let's pause on this for a second because it's not 100% clear. Let's go back to Daniel and keep reading. All right, and we'll see that it kind of drops a bunch of different points in to give us kind of an anchor. Okay, so you should know that from the going forth of the word, right? So from the time of the word to bringing back and rebuilding Jerusalem, right? By an anointed prince, okay, that is going to be 7 weeks. All right, so that's just 49 years. V'shavuim shishim ushnayim, and for 62 weeks, teshuv v'nivnita rechov v'charutz u'betzok ha'itim. It's going to be built broadly as a really nice kind of temple, but in troubled times. It's not going to be so simple. V'charei hashavuim shishim ushnayim, right after the 62 weeks, yikaret Mashiach ve'en lo. The Mashiach is going to be cut off. Who is this Mashiach who's going to be cut off? Actually, let's keep reading. Va'ir haba kodesh yashchit am nagid haba v'kitzo b'shetef v'ad ketz mochama necharetz shomemot. So if we go back, so if we say here, okay, I'll just read this. And after the 62 weeks, this Mashiach is going to be cut off. Who can that Mashiach be? That Mashiach could be, now remember, who is anointed? There are 2 types of people who are anointed. There is the king, and there is who's not the king and is anointed.
Kohen.
Right.
Kohen Gadol.
The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is always anointed. Now, in fact, we have a whole bunch of high priests that are possible. So what are the possibilities here? Who is the Mashiach, the Messiah, who's cut off? There are a couple of possibilities. We can say say it's the high priest from when the temple's rebuilt. Like maybe we're going back here and we're talking about actually the rebuilding of the temple in the beginning, right? And that's what it means. Because if we go back, so I'm going to correct something I said before. If we go back, what it really looks like is there's going to be a period when you do have the temple that's built, but it's going to be troubled times, right? So in the beginning of that, we have Yoshua and we have Zerubbabel, who at least at the time is considered to be a potential king, and Yehoshua, who is the high priest. So either of them could be one of these anointed ones who's cut off, possibly. Or if we're saying that it's talking about the end of this period, if we're talking about the Maccabean age, right? So in other words, if we're saying, okay, it's built, but there are troubled times, right? And after these troubled times, there's going to be a Mashiach that's cut off, right? So who could that be? There's a possibility that it's the high priest Chonio Onias III. So if I'm going to show you now. I'm now in 2nd Maccabees. Okay, now a word about 1st and 2nd Maccabees for those of you who aren't familiar, just to remind you, even for those of you who are. 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees, it's not like 1st Kings and 2nd Kings. It's not like first Samuel and 2nd Samuel, 2 completely different books. Completely different books, written by different people, written in different languages, with different purposes, okay? So 1st Maccabees, written in Hebrew, okay? Written almost as kind of an explanation of the rise of the Hasmonean kings, right? Rise of the Maccabees and the Hasmonean kings. Written in a much less kind of miraculous way. It's in a way it's a little bit less religious than Second Maccabees, even though of course it is religious, but it's not like Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees is written in Greek from the point of view of a diaspora Jew. It's supposedly a condensed version of a longer book, and it was originally written to explain the Day of Nicanor, which was meant to celebrate the victory over Nicanor, which was considered a very important victory during the Maccabean Wars, during the Maccabean battles. Of course, unbeknownst to the author of Second Maccabees, the fight continued far long after that. It wasn't the end of the fight. The Day of Nicanor, which was supposed to be a holiday, was actually the day before Purim, the day before the Day of Mordechai, is the way it's put. The day before the Day of Mordechai, so the day of Tanit Esther should have been a holiday. So when I have a headache on Tanit Esther, I can't fast on Tanit Esther. I'm like, well, this year I'm celebrating the Day of Nicanor, right? So it's at least a little bit of an out if I can't fast. So Second Maccabees gives us much more of a background of what happened before the revolt, whereas First Maccabees gives us a much longer explanation of what happened after, the many battles afterwards. So here, what we see is this is chapter 4. It's explaining kind of a lot of the back and forth of different people who wanted to be high priest of Jerusalem, because you got to collect taxes that way. And here you have Menelaus urged him to kill Onias Chonio, who was a high priest, a beloved high priest. Andronicus came to Onias and, resorting to treachery, offered him sworn pledges and gave him his right hand. He persuaded him, though still suspicious, to come out from the place of sanctuary. Then, with no regard for justice, he immediately put him out of the way. So here you have a high priest who was actually killed, and it's very possible that that is what we're referring to here. That an anointed one is actually murdered, right? Is actually cut off. Yikaret Mashiach ve'enlo, right? And then right afterwards, Va'irva Kodesh Yashchit Am Nagid Haba. And then the city and the holy place, the temple, is going to be destroyed by the people of a prince, a Nagid, and that's Antiochus IV. V'kitzo b'shetef, but his end will be like suddenly. V'ad ketz milchama necharetzet shomemot. Until the end of the war, there will be a lot of desolation. Okay. V'higbir brit larabim shavua echad, right? And he will have a covenant with the many for 1 week. That's 7 years. What is this possibly talking about? The kind of alliance that Antiochus Epiphanes has with the Hellenistic Jews in the city. Okay. V'chatzia shavua yashbit zebach umincha. And for half a week, that's 3.5 years that keeps coming up in Daniel over and over and over again for the time of the decrees, right? The time of Antiochus' decrees. For 3.5 years, there will be no sacrifices, and no meal offering. But al knaf shikutzim mishomim, right? And upon the wing of detestable things, shikutzim here almost certainly is referring to idol worship. If we go back, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it now, but again, if we look at First Maccabees mentions, of course, the idol worship that's set up in the temple. V'ad kala v'necharatza titach al shomem, and until v'ad kala v'necharatza titach al shomem, and until, this is a little bit hard, until the total kind of extinction, which seems to be total extinction of Antiochus, there's going to be devastation. Okay, so you're going to have this period of devastation. You're going to have, it seems like it's talking about starting with with a Mashiach, an anointed one being cut off, which is very possibly Chonyo the third, Onias the third, right? The city is going to be destroyed by this leader of a nation, right? He's going to have a treaty with the many, right? Again, possibly talking about the many Hellenistic Jews who are in the city. And for 3.5 years, you have no sacrifices, okay, until this time is up. Again, this is a prediction which seems to be talking about the age of the Maccabees, rebellion against Antiochus. Now, of course, the years don't really match up very well. It gets really hard to match up the years here, particularly if what you do is you say, it says from the time this word goes out. Now, if you're saying the time this word goes out is the time this word goes out to Daniel, then it gets really hard to say that it's that many years until Antiochus. And so it's quite easy, even in the simple meaning of the text, it's quite easy to start reading this as something that's talking about the future. And then you can kind of say, well, it's a week is not just 7 years, it's 49 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can start kind of multiplying it out. So what happens is, of course, in kind of traditionalist Christians, they want to say that this Mashiach is Jesus. It's very hard to, I mean, it kind of doesn't work because it's very much embedded in things happening in the temple, right? The point that this anointed person is cut off is actually it's bad, but it's not like the culmination of anything, right? It's kind of leading into this very bad period for Jerusalem and the temple, right? So here, and that period for Jerusalem and the temple has a clear and definite ending, and that's also very important here. So what's interesting here actually is not just the prediction of when this is going to, the prediction of kind of the period before the Maccabean revolt. What's interesting also is that and the clear reason why from the beginning you would have a Jewish tradition would be interpreting this, further beyond that, and it's really kind of natural because again the years don't quite match up, but also this idea that when the temple was rebuilt, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, right? Remember, this is before Horus, so it's before Herod's. No one's even thinking about Herod's temple, right? We're not saying, oh, well, Herod's temple's so gorgeous. No one's even comparing it to that. But still, there's this idea that the temple as it was when it was rebuilt, it just didn't do it. It wasn't really there, right? What we need is what's going to happen after the Maccabees. That's going to be this kind of Messianic age. That's going to be the redemption. That's going to be God rebuilding the temple, right? And we can see this tremendous expectation that we have from the Maccabees, from the Hasmoneans, right? They are really supposed to usher in this Messianic age. Oh, I do want to say though, because I didn't say it when we were looking at the text. Okay, what I did want to say was I was talking about this Mashiach who's cut off. I was talking about him as being a Chonyo, Onias the third. Rashi considers him to be I always like to look at the name because I don't mispronounce it. Agrippus. So from Rashi's point of view, this is Agrippus. So of course that's much later, right? So that's the death of the King Agrippus. That's what it's talking about. and that moves everything back because of course, from the point of view of anyone speaking after the destruction of the second temple, they're going to relate it to the destruction of the second temple, right? So everything's gonna be much later. I'm interpreting it like the way, assuming that we're talking about stuff that's going around during the Maccabees, but of course, in tradition, everything's gonna move much later. And because the years are so difficult chronologically, that makes a lot of sense to have to say, look, that doesn't work. It's way too many years, right? So it's got to be talking about something else, right? You can let me know if you would like me to kind of have a class exploring the interpretations in like medieval interpretations of where this is going. But of course, like in our last class where we looked at when the redemption is supposed to come. So whenever you have these things in Daniel, so you have layers and layers and layers of interpretations of what they're talking about. I mean, usually when we look at it, we're going to look mainly at like Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Sadia, which is not where Sadia going, it's a different Sadia, and look at their interpretations of when this is, what this is referring to and how they get those calculations. Any questions? I see a lot of exhausted people. My apologies, but this is Daniel. People are like, do Daniel. I'm like, okay, all right, you asked for it. So thank you for joining me. And yes,
you have a question there.
Yeah. Just a comment. Again, it's tangential, but I've heard from different patients, I'm stating the obvious, there's very much an apocalyptic mood in the world and among some people, but fundamentalist product, like evangelicals, and they talk about, sometimes they refer to Daniel and all sorts of different theories. I find it hard, my head spins because it's so confusing, but the idea that the Antichrist is going to rebuild the temple, one idea I've heard, and then there'll be pagan idols and pork and sacrificed, and then eventually the Mashiach, I assume they mean Jesus, I assume. But
yeah, I mean, a lot of, and I mentioned this before, that someone came up to me, a Christian, and said, how can you read Daniel and not see that it's talking about Jesus?
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, I think it's actually kind of easy, but of course, everyone's going to kind of interpret it the way it'll work in their religion. Now, in every tradition, there are people who are kind of more, let's say, academic, or whatever. Like, so certainly you will have like Christian scholars who don't do that. You know what I mean? There are Christian scholars of Daniel who don't, in fact, say that it's Jesus. I'll be like, no, it's clearly talking about, but it's always this. But what's interesting about texts like these are they're kind of written to be fundamentalists. In other words, they're written to say, hey, guys, God's on our side. He's going to save us. This is what we should expect. This is what's going on in history now. This is it. Right? And that's a classic kind of part of these apocalypses is the idea is that we're living very close to the apocalyptic age, right? And so it's giving you markers so you can say, oh yeah, that happened. The next thing that's going to happen is the redemption, right? So that's kind of and then what happens is future generations just kind of interpret it and reinterpret it.
It's very comforting for like the people who talk about it. They're living in the age.
It's comforting unless people get really disappointed when it doesn't come true. And I've mentioned before, that's a theory of why you have this kind of growing fervor in the end of the Second Temple period, that because this redemption, this new holy whatever that everyone was expecting to come out of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans didn't happen, right? It was still this, there were all sorts of problems, and the Hasmoneans weren't such righteous, whatever, all the time. And there were all sorts of issues. And that kind of fed a growing frustration and a growing belief that no, now it's going to come. And that's why it was everyone was really primed for the revolt, for the rebellion against the Romans, because everyone was like, there were all these apocalypses that had been building, not just ones like this that are written, like not just things that are written around the Maccabees, but afterwards, where they're like, no, and it's wrong, and it's wrong to be ruled by a foreign government. That's for sure. That's just wrong. And the redemption's coming, the redemption's coming, and it just kind of built. So it's very possible that was at least partially because of the disappointment with the Hasmoneans, because of the tremendous hopes that people had from this dynasty. Cheryl, yeah.
I'm confused though. If the dates match up so well with the 70 years, excuse me.
These ones don't.
No. But if the dates match up well with the 70 years, and it goes to when Ezra and Nehemiah Nehemiah built and the walls are completed, why not just leave it like that? Why
because they don't think that's the redemption. That's why.
Because the temple isn't grand enough, or why not?
First of all, if you read the beginning of Second Maccabees, you see just how corrupted it was before the Maccabees. In other words, you have people going back, people buying the high priesthood, people going to the capital, buying the high priesthood, coming back saying it's mine now. And there's another guy goes and he buys it, and he says it's mine now. And it's really corrupt. So I think probably more because of that than because of the actual building. In fact, it says, let me stop the share. It said, but before I stop the share, I'll point out, it says that it's going to be a nice big building. It says, let's see here. Here, it'll be built again with a broad place, right? But it's gonna be in troubled times. So in other words, it seems like, on the contrary, there's gonna be a decent size from their point of view, but it's not, the way it works isn't right. And you really do look again. This is what's interesting. If you look at the book of Second Maccabees, it gives you kind of the background of what happens before the decrees and what possibly kind of was at least the context of the decrees, which was that there was a tremendous amount of corruption going on. Like, again, people buying the high priesthood, Onias gets murdered. I mean, just craziness, right?
But that's the Hasmoneans are corrupt. You're saying that
before the Hasmoneans, way before the Hasmoneans. No. This is not the Hasmoneans. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about before the decrees, before Antiochus. Antiochus, you have people buying the high priesthood. One guy goes and he buys the high priesthood, and the other guy collects more money and he goes and buys the high priesthood. Then another one's like, you know what? I'm going to have him murdered, and he has him murdered. Like, what the hell? Like, excuse me, but like what? Right? It's very hard to kind of say this is what. So I think it was that. I think it's that kind of corruption that makes it makes the attitude that, the redemption happened when it was first rebuilt difficult to swallow. I think, and to me, it's very much like, and it makes sense if you're looking at it from around the time of the Maccabees, because that's what's going to be more prominent in your mind, is this tremendous corruption, and not kind of Ezra, Nehemiah, or even the period before Ezra, Nehemiah, where there wasn't that same type of corruption, right? At least it seems like.
So why wasn't there's something about me that wants to think that once there's something there in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, that was like why can't we see that some of us have come back and that's a good thing and stop there?
So at every stage, so I'll end with this. Every stage had something that you could point to and say, well, isn't this it? So you could say, well, now that we're back, right, in the beginning, in Shivat Zion, return to Zion. Now that we're back, isn't that it? Well, we have an altar, isn't that it? Well, now we built the temple, isn't that it? No, Nehemiah is like, we have to build a city.
Mhm.
And it was so important to Nehemiah. I've said this before a million times. It was so important to Nehemiah to build the city. This was the basic thing that people risked their lives. Multiple people, including Nehemiah, were risking their lives to build the city. It wasn't done until the city was built. So at any of those points, you could point, but isn't this it? Isn't this it? Isn't this it? Right? So I think that the same sort of thing if I'll talk about the state of Israel being the beginning of the Geula. My brother will not accept that. My brother is like, look at the corruption, look at this. They're not keeping the Torah. This is not. How can you say this is the beginning of the redemption, right? So, and I really think that that's kind of like, look at all this, look at everything that's going on. How can you possibly say this is the beginning of the redemption? So it's the same sort of thing. And that's also what I mean when I say this is kind of a fundamentalist view, that like there's and I don't mean it as negative. It always sounds negative, fundamentalist, but I mean like it's like this is the way things need to be a certain way, and they're not that way. So how can you say that this is being run the right way? Yeah.
Yeah, there are people who didn't want the Green to accept what the British were offering, what the United Nations were offering, because it wasn't everything. And, it was the decision to, we're going to take what we have.
Look, I mean, again, and again, this isn't my idea, this is Al Baumgarten's idea, but the feeling after 67, when we won this miraculous war, what for people who didn't fight in it, at least felt really like a miraculous war, and now everything should be the Messianic age, and then it wasn't, right? And then
I remember I was a little kid, our Hebrew teachers, some of them they used to use the term Agudanik. I don't think they use that anymore, but they were Charedim, and you could see the changes in their faces, because before then, they were very ambivalent. They didn't want to celebrate Yom HaTzmaut, et cetera, but watching the teachers talk, I got lunchtime during the war. They were excited, and maybe this is.
right.
I remember. I was going to say that. I remember very explicitly. Yeah.
Right. So and I think that's kind of we can see that that's kind of informing what's going on in Daniel here, which is that there's this great with the Maccabees, they're really expecting something like that. It's a miraculous victory. I mean, I still don't get it. But it's so it's and there are tremendous expectations. Whereas before then, and again, we know this really from Second Maccabees, right before the Antiochus's decrees and the Maccabees and that whole thing, were even before the decrees, there was all this corruption connected to the temple, connected to the high priesthood. So. Right. Anyway, so and that would explain why it's so important that that a high priest is killed. I mean, that's the height of corruption. You have Chronos murdered. That's crazy. But thank you for joining me, and
thank you, Miriam.
Join me in 2 weeks when we're back on track with Daniel.